In June 2019, a record label in Nashville called Big Machine was sold to a holding company owned by a man named Scooter Braun. The price was around $300 million in cash and equity. The single most valuable asset in that deal was a stack of 6 master recordings. 6 albums made by one artist named Taylor Swift between 2006 and 2017. She had written every song on every album. She had sung every note. She did not own a single one of them. The label did. A few months later, Taylor Swift announced she would re-record every album, note for note, lyric for lyric. The new versions would be hers. The old ones would stay the label's. By 2024, the re-records were generating tens of millions of dollars a year in streaming royalties paid to Taylor Swift personally, while the original Big Machine masters that Braun later flipped to a Disney-adjacent fund called Shamrock Capital for around $400 million saw their stream counts collapse by more than 70%. The $400 million investment was, by 2023, generally considered impaired. That is the only story you need to understand the record business. The biggest pop star on the planet, with the best lawyers money can buy, signed a contract at 15 and spent the next 15 years not owning what she sang. And then, when she finally had the resources to fight back, the only solution available to her was to record everything a second time. There are 3 companies in the world that own most of the music you listen to. Universal Music Group, headquartered in Santa Monica. Sony Music Entertainment, headquartered in New York. Warner Music Group, headquartered in New York. Between them, they control roughly 70% of the global recorded music market. The other 30% is split between independents and Asian majors. 3 companies, 70% of every song you stream. If you bought a record label tomorrow, this is what you'd actually be buying. Then there's the advance, the defining transaction of the entire industry, and probably the single most misunderstood deal in modern entertainment. A new artist signs a record deal. The label pays them an advance, $250,000 for an unknown, $1 million if they're hot, $5 million for a star-jumping labels. That money is not a signing bonus, it is a loan against the artist's future royalties. Every dollar the artist eventually earns gets sent to the label first, and the label keeps it until the advance is recouped. Then, theoretically, the artist starts getting paid. Most artists never recoup. Industry estimates put the share of major label albums that ever earn out their advance at around 1 in 5. The other 4 are paid for, in essence, by the next album, or by the next artist, or by the catalogue. There is a famous case here. In 1995, the group TLC declared bankruptcy. By that point, Crazy Sexy Cool had sold roughly 11 million copies in the United States alone. The album would eventually go diamond. They were 3 women at the absolute peak of pop stardom, and they filed Chapter 11. Their royalty rate after producer splits and management cuts came out to roughly $40,000 per member per year, against tour support advances, video budgets, and original advances they were still working off. The label had not stolen anything. The label had executed the contract. The contract had cross-collateralized them into bankruptcy. That's the trick. A record deal is not 4 albums or 6 albums. It is one long ledger. The label keeps the ledger. The artist gets a check only when the ledger turns positive, and the ledger almost never turns positive. Then there's the second mechanism, the most important distinction in the entire industry, and the one almost every fan gets wrong. There are 2 copyrights inside every song. The first is the musical composition, the melody, the lyrics, the chord structure. This is owned by the songwriter, or much more often, by a publishing company the songwriter signed with. The second is the master recording, the actual audio file of a specific performance in a specific studio on a specific day. This is owned by the record label that paid for the studio. When you stream a Drake song on Spotify, two completely separate companies get paid. One check goes to the publisher who controls the composition. A much larger check goes to the label who owns the master. The master recording earns roughly 3 times what the composition earns. Labels own the larger half of the music economy. That is the half they monetize through Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, TikTok licensing deals, sync placements in movies and TV, vinyl pressings, anniversary repackages, and every other window the recording lives in. It compounds forever. Copyright in the United States runs the life of the author plus 70 years. A song recorded in 1975 will still be generating royalties in the year 2099. This is why Taylor Swift re-recorded. She owned the compositions all along. She had written them. She did not own the masters. So she went into a studio and made new masters, owned by her. Every time a fan streams a Taylor's version instead of the original, the master royalty switches sides. That single move is estimated to have transferred hundreds of millions of dollars in lifetime value off the Shamrock Capital balance sheet and onto hers. It only worked because she was Taylor Swift. Almost no other artist in the world has the songwriting credits, the audience, the lawyers, the cash, and the 3 uninterrupted years to record 6 albums a second time. The compositions stay with the writer. The masters stay with the label. The label wins unless you are famous enough to record everything twice, and almost nobody is. Then there's the 360 deal. In 2007, Madonna signed a contract with Live Nation. It was reported at $120 million over 10 years. Live Nation was not primarily a record company, they were a concert promoter. The contract gave them a piece of touring, merchandise, sponsorships, fan club, image licensing, everything Madonna did as a recording artist for a decade. That deal was the template for what became known as the 360. Why did labels start writing 360 deals around then? Because Napster had just finished destroying CD sales between 2002 and 2008, and the labels noticed something. The records weren't earning anymore, but the fame the records had created was still printing money everywhere else, so the labels rewrote new artist contracts to take a slice of every place the fame ended up. 10% of touring, 20% of merchandise, 25% of sponsorship deals. In some cases more. A 360 deal is essentially the label saying, if we make you a star, we get a piece of what stars are paid for, not just what records are paid for. New artists in 2026 sign 360 deals by default. It is the price of admission to a major label distribution system. Then there's the catalog. This is where the real wealth lives. In December 2021, Bruce Springsteen sold his entire catalog, recordings and publishing, to Sony Music for a reported $500 million. He was 72 years old. A year earlier, Bob Dylan had sold his songwriting catalog to Universal Music Publishing for somewhere between $300 and $400 million. Stevie Nicks sold 80% of her publishing to a private equity-backed fund called Primary Wave for $100 million. Justin Bieber sold his publishing rights in early 2023 to Hipgnosis for around $200 million. Bruce, Bob, Stevie, Justin, all within 24 months. This was not a coincidence. Interest rates had been near zero for a decade. Every pension fund and private equity firm on earth was hunting for yield. Music catalogs, predictable, contractually obligated, decades-long streams of streaming and licensing income looked exactly like the kind of asset they wanted. A private equity-owned vehicle called Hipgnosis Songs Fund went public in London in 2018 and spent the next 4 years buying up rights to roughly 70,000 songs for around $2.5 billion. Sony bought a controlling stake in Michael Jackson's catalogue in 2024, valuing his estate at around $600 million. Concord Music, backed by Apollo Global Management, bought Hipgnosis in 2024 for $1.6 billion. KKR has a music rights arm. Blackstone has a music rights arm. The acquirer is not paying for sentimental value. They are paying for an income stream. Bruce Springsteen's catalogue produces a known, modelable amount of streaming, sync, and broadcast royalty per year. The buyer pays a multiple of that, typically 15 to 20 times annual earnings, and collects every dollar of income for the next century. A record label is, at its core, a portfolio of these income streams. New artists are speculative. Most never recoup. The catalogue is the base. The catalogue is what gets re-rated when interest rates fall. The catalogue is what one major actually buys when it buys another major. Then there's streaming. This is the most lucrative trade the labels ever made. In 2008, Spotify was a Swedish startup nobody had heard of. To launch in any country, it needed to license catalog from the major labels. The deal Spotify struck, and the deal every streamer after it has struck, was the same. The labels would license their catalog in exchange for roughly 55% of net revenue, plus equity in the streaming company itself. That last part was the genius move. When Spotify went public on the New York Stock Exchange in April 2018 at around a $30 billion market cap, Sony Music owned 5.7% of the company. Sony sold most of its stake almost immediately and pocketed roughly $750 million. Warner Music owned around 1.8%. Universal owned a smaller slice that it sold off in pieces too. The labels did not just charge Spotify a licensing fee, they became shareholders of Spotify. They built the streaming economy and they own equity in the platforms that distribute it. When a new streamer launches today, whether it's an audio app or a fitness platform or a video service that wants a music feature, the negotiation runs against 3 companies that collectively control most of the music and a piece of the existing platforms playing it. Then there's cross-collateralization, the legal device that makes recoupment almost mathematically impossible for most artists. Here's how it works. An artist signs a 4-album deal. The label advances $1 million across the deal. Album 1 earns $600,000 in royalties. Album 2 only earns $200,000. The artist has not recouped, total earnings of $800,000 against $1 million advance. Even if Album 3 earns $1 million on its own, the prior shortfalls get netted against it before the artist sees a dollar. That is just the headline mechanism. Underneath it sit packaging deductions, free goods reserves, recoupment of music video budgets, recoupment of tour support advances, technology deductions, foreign deductions, controlled composition clauses on the songwriting side. Each one is a separate subtraction from the artist's column on the same single ledger. By the time the math finishes running, the label has subtracted its own marketing budget, its own logistics costs, and its own loan to the artist from the artist's royalty earnings. The label keeps every dollar that doesn't make it through that filter, which is most of them. Last one, the compensation question. In September 2021, Universal Music Group spun out of the French conglomerate Vivendi and listed on the Euronext Amsterdam exchange at an opening valuation of roughly $54 billion. The CEO of Universal Music was a British man named Lucian Grange. He had been there 22 years. As part of the listing, he was paid a special one-time bonus tied to the success of the IPO. The bonus was reported at around $142 million in 1 year. It is the largest single-year executive compensation package in the history of the music industry. It is more than Daniel Ek, the CEO of Spotify, has ever made in a year. It is more than Tim Cook has ever made in a year. It is the cleanest expression of where the value in the modern music economy actually pools. A record label monetizes 7 separate windows of revenue from 60 years of accumulated copyrights. The catalog appreciates with every interest rate cycle. New artists arrive every quarter, sign loans dressed up as advances, hand over their masters in exchange for a chance at fame, and accept the cross-collateralized ledger. The label collects on the recording, collects on the publishing, if it owns the publisher, which it usually does, collects on the touring, collects on the merchandise, collects on the sync placements, collects on the streaming royalties, collects on its equity in the streamers themselves. The artist gets the spotlight, the label gets the catalog, the CEO of the label gets $142 million. In 2023, Taylor Swift finished the re-recording project. 4 of the 6 albums had been re-released as Taylor's version: Fearless, Red, Speak Now, and 1989. Each one debuted at #1 in the United States. By 2025, industry estimates put master royalty income from the re-records at over $50 million per year, paid to Taylor Swift personally. The Big Machine masters that Shamrock Capital paid $400 million for in 2020 were, by then, generating a small fraction of the streams they used to. The investment is widely considered an impairment. She is the only artist in modern history to have pulled this off at scale. The contract was the contract. The masters lived with the label. The catalog lives with whichever PE fund buys the catalog next. The streaming dollars get split 55 to 45 before any artist gets paid. The advance is a loan, and the loan rolls into the next loan and the next. The label always wins. Because the label set the terms, and the artist signed.